We essentially came out to lunch, and we had just sat at the lunch table. One of my colleagues got a phone call, and then everybody started getting a phone call, and then it became clear that there was something going on in this 14 Riverside, which was a complex where wine. So it always felt like a horror movie that was sort of playing out on WhatsApp. You know, down to the trail of communication going dead and so on. So we were kind of clear. We had lost about 6 people, and we knew who we had lost and where we had lost them and how. You know, we were following this on WhatsApp. You have a sense of reality, what actually happened.
You know, these are people's parents. You know, these are people's, you know, their family members, their cousins, their relatives, their aunties and their uncles of people.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that as a CEO? What's up, everybody? My name is Benjamin. I'm the founder and CEO of Nala. I'm really excited today on our Build Our Africa speaker series. We have Ken Njoroge, the co-founder and former CEO of Cellulant. Karibu sana.
Asante.
I'm very happy to have you here in the office. Ken is somebody I've looked up to for many, many years. I've read about him, you know, for the early days when I was starting in payments in my own journey. And today's actually the first time we've ever met. So really excited to be with you today. As Nala, we've been working with Cellulant in multiple African markets, and they've been a great partner for us for all the business that we've been doing in these countries. And it's really happy to meet one of the co-founders behind the vision and setting everything up at Cellulant. So Karibu sana.
Asante. Yeah, and pleasure to meet you as well. I've followed Nala's journey the last couple of years. And then recently, very excited that you partnered with us at Cellulant, with Akshay and David and the team there. So happy to be supportive of each other's growth journey. Yeah.
Asante. So sijui kama tuongee Kiswahili leo au Kiingereza, we can balance it out.
Zote mbili ni sawa.
Yeah. So no, today what I wanted to talk about is your journey in building. I know you've done many talks around the world in different universities, from Harvard to different places and different, lectures that you've given. But one of the things I'd love to understand and discuss today is your journey on the personal side, really understanding what it's like to build a company, because there's a large human element I believe a lot of people miss out as a co-founder and a CEO of a business, right? Yeah. And what I'd love to spend time today is just understanding that a little bit more. But let's start with the background today. Where's home originally for you?
Yeah, actually home is Nakuru. Nakuru is a town that's sort of 2 hours away from Nairobi. It's sort of, a good blend between urban and rural. I think it's grown over the last few years towards the city, but it was essentially sort of very rural setting. So after high school, so I did all my schooling there and then came to Nairobi for university. And Nairobi certainly was very intimidating. Intimidating city, very tall buildings, very fast-paced people. It just felt that you needed to notch up to sort of be able to thrive in this city where you, as a rural boy, you knew no one. So, and then I got into Nairobi. I was very fortunate very early on in the sort of my gap year. We had typically 2 gap years between high school and uni. And in those 2 gap years, I got a scholarship to study computers at Strathmore University. So at that time, it was a college. Now it's become one of the big universities in Nairobi. And during the gap year, it was essentially sort of passing time, to resume my sort of eventual university studies or in the School of Medicine to study pharmacy. So, but that accidental journey got me in a lot of exposure to computers. I fell in love with computers, a lot of exposure to, we had a couple of lecturers who would bring magazines of Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and so on. And that life seemed quite exciting. So when I went across, after 2 years of doing that and going across to pharmacy school, it was essentially very foreign. So I didn't last that long. I failed my first year, actually. very difficult thing because I was always a good student. So I'd never seen failure. I think that was the first time that I did. And then I think after sort of another semester of a lot of soul searching, just came to the conclusion that I actually loved computers more. So I tried actually to switch to the computer science faculty at the University of Nairobi. But at that time, it was very difficult. I could not carry a lot of credits that I'd done through Strathmore. So when I did the math, it just meant that I'd probably lose a couple of years of life.
Oh, man.
And then just took a tough decision to sort of to quit University of Nairobi. Went back to Strathmore for about a year of study. And then I considered myself sufficiently educated to go into the market, and I did. I worked for some of the startup ISPs. So in a sense, I mean, we call them startups now, but they were essentially sort of pioneering the connectivity into the internet. And it was fantastic. You had access to the internet. I could see the internet exploding and entrepreneurship exploding in other parts of the world. And coupled with the love for computers, coupled with sort of just the burning desire to be something and to build something with great meaning.
Where does that come from for you?
I think it comes from upbringing. So I grew up in a single parent home. So in a sense, as you grow in a single parent home, you go through a lot of struggle, right? Like, I mean, actually, you know life through struggle. Everything, going to school, paying school fees, everything's a struggle. And I think over time, and my mom was an iron lady, and she drilled a lot of values. And so throughout the struggles, a couple of messages were always very clear that you have to strive to be the best. There's no room for second place. It's the only way that you actually make progress. And so I think I came out of that experience with a competitive advantage. I was fairly tough, very resilient, and with a strong set of values really drilled by a very clear-minded single mom. So I think I came out ambitious, right? And what happened between discovering computers and some of my exposure in the early career defined what that ambition could be in terms of size, in terms of scale, in terms of how it looked and felt. And so throughout Strathmore, I got into programming, and through the sort of exposure to the internet, began to see other sort of techie entrepreneurs like the Netscape founders and all of those sort of building really interesting technology companies. So, and then went on into the early ISPs and sort of began to see the sort of the first early phases of startups. I mean, Africa Online for one, which was also built and co-founded by fairly young people and then expanded across Africa. Ended up acquiring 3Mice and spent some time in that organization and see these young founders sort of dreaming, being audacious and expanding across Africa. And said, well, wow, I think this is certainly a life worth living. And certainly can be done, right? Because, I mean, of course, the founders had gone to school in MIT, Harvard, but, having interacted with them, I'm like, hang on, okay, they're super smart. But you could work hard and get yourself there. I think around that time it was incredibly well clear in my mind, burnt in my mind, and in my heart, this desire to sort of build this great thing across Africa and build it on values that I was brought up with, right? No corruption, no excuses for mediocre work. And just hard work, outwork everybody else, and be resilient and be patient over a very long time.
How did like this idea of, not even idea, but like this push to start Cellulant come? Like, how old were you? Like, where? Like, talk to me about just the beginning days.
Yeah, I think Cellulant evolved, right? So first was, I think, was a desire to start a company of a certain scale. I think by the time that as far back as 97, so I finished my high school in 92. In 97, I was about 22. So as far back as 22, I knew that I wanted to start a company.
Wow.
And I knew that I wanted to start a company that looked like Netscape and that looked like what Steve Jobs had built or what Bill Gates had built, because I'd seen these guys in magazine articles. So with that, we founded 3 Mice with the ambition to build it across Africa. Now, for certain structural reasons, and just also the collapse of the just sort of co-founder alignment in terms of just the vision and the future of the business. 3 Mice generally never lived up to. We built something great. Was a fairly well-known brand and to a large extent actually inspiring. I ran into some people who actually were saying, wow, we followed 3 Mice's journey when we were in uni. So around 2002, it became very clear that the structure and the partnership wasn't going to be able to scale across Africa. But then at that time, for myself, I transitioned from writing code to being, typically today we'd call it a product person. So you hang out with the sales guys and essentially go meet customers. One of our customers was Safaricom. And very quickly I realized that whereas in the internet connectivity world, it was still a dial-up world. We were talking about 15,000 dial-up connections, people connected to the internet. There was a mobile operator that has from launch had moved into hundreds and passed 1 million customers very early in the journey. One day I got an epiphany and said, oh, wow, looks like everything that you see on the internet will make its way to mobile in one form or another. So that's the place to be. And so I put together a small skunkworks team within 3 Mice. And we called our sales project name Cellulant.
Okay. Wow.
And so we started spending afternoons sort of bantering about what could we do in mobile and so on. So as I began to think about transitioning from 3 Mice, I was still a 50% shareholder of 3 Mice. I think I came to the conclusion that probably Cellulant was probably where I wanted to spend my time in the future. So I essentially went to my co-founders at the time and essentially traded my 50% equity in Cellulant to just the concept, the 50% equity in 3 Mice for this skunkworks project and just an opportunity to talk to the team if they wanted to join me, right? And so we did that. And then around that time, I'd connected with Bolaji, who became my co-founder.
Bolaji, you met at 3 Mice?
Bolaji. I met Bolaji in my final year at 3 Mice.
Okay.
And so at the time, our thinking was that, look, how could we expand this to Nigeria? And so we began basically sort of visioning the future of Africa and just thinking about just sharing stories. So we mirrored a lot of our stories and paths mirrored a lot. We connected a lot on values. And so when I spun off Cellulant, out of it was just natural that we sort of go out and build it together. I'm a big fan of co-founders, right? Like even though I was transitioning from a partnership that came to an end, I was not very skeptical of partnerships. I still believe that partnerships are critical to succeed in a very long sort of entrepreneurial journey. So it was natural. So with Bolaji, I think the thing that we agreed on is that we could build $1 billion business across Africa. The size was very important because we thought that at $1 billion, nobody can ignore your story and the values you stand for. So that was always a huge driving force for Cellulant. And so we ended up sketching this vision on a serviette of sort of $1 billion business in mobile services. We hadn't defined what to do in mobile yet. We had some ideas, but it wasn't very clear. And built by Africans for Africa, founded on very specific values. I think the most critical value was always no corruption. So you could say that that's how Cellulant was born.
And so talk to me about so for context, for people watching, Cellulant's raised well over $50 million in its journey here. And, it's one of the largest tech companies on the African continent. You operate, I believe, in over 13 or 14 countries, right? Or maybe 18, including some of the partners you work with. And how do you think about, did you ever see that as something that was happening? Did you ever see that, okay, this is coming to fruition? Like, you were there for, 18, 19 years. How did you see that, from 2003 till when you stepped down as the CEO? Do you ever envision it getting as big as how it got?
Yeah, there was a couple of interesting things, and my thinking about that, was very different at different stages. So I think in the beginning, I think, when we sketched the idea on the Serviette, I think it was a sort of very strong internal drive and commitment to actually build something great.
Yeah.
And, to build something great, you have to lay a good foundation. And there's only one chance of building a foundation, right? Yeah. You can't go out and into year 5 to rebuild the foundation. So very early on, we started to ask ourselves hard questions about how does a billion-dollar business think about its decision, think about how it hires its people, think about its brand, and think about how it evolves a company. So even when we had no money, like that was always a very strong foundation. I think we had the conviction, and I think out of passion and naivete, it's a blend of things.
Yeah.
That there's nothing that was going to stand in our way of building this billion-dollar business, right? Like most of my staff normally say in the early interviews, when they came and they asked me, okay, what do you want to build? I think David gives this example.
Yeah.
Very early on, and he came for an interview, and I told him about what we're trying to do. Then he said, so where do you want this company to go? And I looked at him without flinching. I told him, I want to build a billion-dollar business. And so David's a numbers guy. So he asked me, so how big are you now? I told him, well, $20,000 a month in revenue.
Yeah.
And he almost laughed. But he says when he looked into my eyes, he realized not a laughing matter, like I'm dead serious.
Yeah.
And so he realized actually that even in that interview, he wasn't getting interviewed for a job. He was being called to a mission. So in the early days, we were incredibly mission driven. And then, as they say, everybody's got a plan. As a great philosopher, Mike Tyson said, everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the face.
Yeah.
So we get into the market. So we have now a concept. We actually figure out we can launch a business, the mobile services space that sells ringtones.
Okay.
And you're
selling ringtones as the first product.
That was our first phase of sort of entry into the market.
Okay.
And then the regulatory framework isn't there.
Yeah.
Both in the telco space.
Yeah. For
regulatory framework for music and music copyrights are somewhat a mess and run by cartels.
Cellulant basically built the OG Spotify. But go on.
and mobile operators are hostile, right? They see us as competitors.
Yeah.
And so for 3 years, essentially, we are involved in a sort of life and death, near-death experiences of sort of battling these sort of structural issues. And so we move from sort of this mission orientation, mission drive into this phase of actually trying to get something in the market. And every day is a battle.
Yeah.
And during those days, then you are in huge moments of, it's basically a lot of determination, but also huge moments of doubt. There are days you wake up and you're like, man, are we gonna make it?
Like, I'm sure that never ended though. That's how it happens.
And so we did that.
Yeah.
And then, by the third year, fourth year, all these things click and the business really takes off.
So I have a question just on that. So there's probably many founders watching, like let's say here in Nairobi, and they're probably thinking like, oh, well, like Ken probably had a lot of money. That's how they got started. And, I have these cool ideas and I have this great vision. I also want to build $1 billion business, but I don't have the money that maybe Ken had. What was the truth behind that? Was there a lot of money that you had to start with, or where did that money come from to like maybe even just pay salaries?
Not at all. I think, the venture angel ecosystem didn't exist. So for me, actually, it's always a culture shock. And now that the last 2 years, I've spent some time with companies to see companies with $2 million with an idea and so on. I am not certain, by the way, it's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I respect that, times have changed and so on. But actually, at that time, on day one of Cellulant, we had zero capital. Yeah. Bolaji had a job, right? And he had a credit card.
Yeah.
So, and then of course you're essentially trying to build this company for where there's no template, right?
Yeah.
And there's no template for how long it's gonna look, how long it's gonna take, and so on. So you essentially sort of drive these things day by day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you zooming back and say, look, certainly it costs money to build a business.
Yeah.
Somebody has to provide that capital. So in today's world, angels and VCs provide that capital. In our world, in those days, we got that capital from debt, right? And essentially debt from employees. So basically, a lot of the early stuff, the interviews, essentially you interview them, you grill them to make sure they were fit for purpose and fit for mission.
Yeah.
And at the end of that interview was always a conversation around, look, okay, what's your expectations? We can't afford that, and we can't guarantee it. And the little that we can afford, we can't even guarantee month on month. So you got to be sure that that's what you're signing up for. And a lot of the guys who now are running the business, Faz, the CTO, David, and so on, joined in those days.
Wow.
When they did, they essentially became the first investors in the business, right? My wife now was my fiance then, was a banker. She had gotten facilities to buy an apartment early. Also decided that, well, if we're going to get married, I don't need a single ladies apartment. It probably makes sense to invest in this dream because this is what our future is going to be like. So essentially, and then lots of friends and so on. So really, it's a classic case of the staff members bringing themselves to the party, friends, family, and so on.
Wow.
And I think by year 1, year 2, we probably were maybe about $180,000 in those days in debt, which is probably about $300,000 today.
Wow.
So, what was good about that is that you had to sell the vision to these people, right? That's why they invested.
Yeah.
Very, very similar to investors that you would do. But I think by doing that, what happens is that because you have to sell the vision to the teams.
Yeah.
The types of people that join very early, they're also mission aligned and mission driven. And when I look at Cellulant in now, half the management team is essentially people who came out of those very early days, understand the mission, understand the intricacies of the business, and then it's a blend, between a lot of new blood.
Yeah.
And a lot of guys who've been there from the very beginning who understand the values of the business. And I think that mix created a sort of platform for resilience for the business over a very long time.
So what specific advice do you have to a founder in that position where they're like, hey, Ken, I'm sure you get reached out to a lot, right? And like, hey, Ken, I have this amazing idea. I don't have the capital for it. What specific advice would you tell that person?
I tell them to start. Just start.
But that's how you can. I don't know how to start. I don't have cash. I need cash.
Then you shouldn't be in business. Go and work and find a job. Yeah. I mean, look.
Yeah.
I can't, I have no words.
Yeah.
To even try to imagine and to understand somebody who has a great idea and then says, they don't know how to start. And I can't understand that concept.
Yeah.
The only concept I have is that, are you sure? Are you sure about the idea?
Yeah.
Do you have belief in it?
Yeah.
Are you committed to the mission behind the idea?
Yeah.
If you are, you start.
Yeah. So
you start where you are with what you have.
Nice. Yeah. So you started Cellulant in 2003, and have seen so many different things happen across the organization. High moments, low moments, big wins, painful moments as well. I read your letter about stepping down in 2021. It's something that a lot of us founders read, and about the lion, taking a step back and looking for people to drive the business forward and so on. And that was a powerful letter. When did you realize that you needed to step down? What was it?
Unfortunately, a little too late, actually. I I think the business needed a new leadership as far back as 2016. I mean, of course, I've had 2 years to sort of reflect on my journey. And around that time, and so in a sense, my final years of Cellulant, I feel, were not as productive as they should have been because I was essentially out of my strength. And then through a sort of sequence of circumstances was sort of trapped in time. And I don't think that particular dynamic enabled me to be as productive as I should have been in those days. I remember one of our investors in 2016, they just invested like a couple of months before. So we had gone for a board meeting, and so we stepped out to have coffee, and he chatted me up and he asked me, "So Ken, what keeps you awake at night?" Yeah. And he repeated this story to me the other day, and he told me he almost collapsed because he had just invested. And I was frankly, in my mind, the biggest thing that kept me awake at night, am I the right CEO for this phase? And this was way back in 2016.
Wow.
So what happened then through a series of, one, we've just gotten new investors. So you have a duty and responsibility. So you don't allow that thought to evolve into its natural conclusion. And then we went through a crisis with the collapse of Chase Bank, our primary banker. Also our working capital facilities and so on. When the bank collapse sort of dried up, that was almost killed our business. Wow. So we essentially had to cut costs. The concept of fallowing, we did fallowing, and all of us in the management team basically took a 8-month, almost 9-month salary break.
Wow.
With a couple of the guys in the management team as well now. I couldn't entertain that thought, and then was on a extended fundraising period, 2017, 2018. The markets were tough.
Yeah.
Then we had 2019, the terrorist attack, and then 2020, the corona year. And then towards the end of 2020, we had this crisis in Nigeria, and my co-founder left. So in a sense, I was sort of a classic entrepreneur, trapped in a job and completely out of my strength zone.
Yeah,
I think.
So Ken, what is the best part about not being a CEO today?
Yeah, well, I have a full night's sleep, and essentially, and I'm present in sort of non-work situations, social situations. So I think there was always something buzzing in my mind, right? And one problem or one opportunity and so on. So I almost always lost sleep around 3:30, 4 p.m. I just 4 a.m. never slept beyond that. I now do for most nights.
Yeah.
And presence, right? Like even when I was sort of physically present at home, like on a weekend or whatever it is. I'd stopped working weekends for a while. But even then, my mind would be running. So sometimes my kids would say, Dad.
Yeah. And multiple times just to get your attention.
To get my attention. So I think having, the CEO transition was very difficult. We'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
But I think I'm probably a lot more relaxed. The challenges of the business, they are more or less the same.
Yeah.
Maybe the zeros are different, and Akshay and the team are more than capable, and they're driving that.
Yeah.
All my wealth is in the business, so
you needed to do very well.
You would imagine that structurally I should generally be just as stressed as I was, but somehow sitting as a board member, like you can discuss all these challenges and switch off and somewhat go. That wasn't the case actually, sitting on the other side of the team. I spent some time with them a couple of weeks ago. Half a morning at the office. And I just marveled at how relaxed they felt. So it was kind of a good vibe. And I'm like, okay, wow, they don't look burnt out, they don't look exhausted, they look completely energized for the next phase, which was very nice.
Ken, on January 15th, 2019, was a date that many Kenyans around the world and many people around the world will always remember. It was the Dusit terrorist attack here in Nairobi, where you lost 6 of your team members.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the moment you found out what was going on?
Yeah, it was difficult. I mean, just yesterday I was at the complex. I normally, once in a while, I go to the complex. Feels like home. I don't, not every day do I have the nerve to go into the building, Cavendish, which where our offices were. I've been since the terrorist attack. I've been there just twice. But I'm always in the complex. Feels like home, but I just don't have the courage to go into the building. So when the terrorist attack happened, so myself and the senior team were in Zambia. We had actually just sort of gotten to Zambia the day before for sort of the yearly offsite kickoff, right? Like we said, look, okay, 2019 for us was a transformational year. Mm-hmm. We had just closed our Series C funding, September of 2018. So this is essentially we had capital. But then we needed to sort of prepare the business for the next phase of growth, right? Which was essentially payment-centric thing. Zambia is 2 hours behind Nairobi. So we'd done the morning session. So at 1 o'clock Zambia time, 1:10, we essentially came out to lunch, and we just sat at the lunch table. One of my colleagues got a phone call, and then everybody started getting a phone call, and then it became clear that there was something going on in this 14 Riverside, which was a complex where we're in. And I think about half an hour to 1 hour, it became clear the nature of the thing. There was a terrorist attack. And essentially our staff, we had a company WhatsApp group. So essentially groups were making their way out and so on. So it was very clear that this wasn't a good situation. And then, throughout the afternoon, we went probably through the most difficult part, because a lot of people made it out, but then there was a group that was still unaccounted for. They never made it out of the building, and actually, they started to give us a sense where they were hiding, what they were hearing, and so on. So it always felt like a horror movie that was sort of playing out on WhatsApp. So by end of that evening, I think by 6:30, we were very clear what had happened, right? Because right to the last moment, when we lost our colleagues, they'd been sending WhatsApps, where they were hiding, what they were hearing, and also the different groups, because we lost the different groups in different locations, down to the trail of communication going dead and so on. So we were kind of clear. We had lost about 6 people, and we knew who we had lost and where we had lost them and how. And so, as we sort of try to soak this in, so you feel you're far away, very helpless for us as leaders of the business and so on. And then, sometime at 6, we said, look, okay, I think we have a good sense what has happened. What's the most important thing for us to do now? And then we said, look, the parents of these guys, they're probably following this through the news, maybe not with as much information as we do, but where there is, and then we scramble, people start to look at HR files, and we make a list of the parents and next of kins and so on, and we divide them up to start making these calls. Incredibly difficult, because you always have some hope that there's some explanation and probably they're still alive. But also on the other hand, we were following this on WhatsApp, you have a sense of reality, what actually happened. So, and some of the parents thought they were prank calls, right? Some of the folks knew that the kids worked somewhere for an IT company somewhere in Nairobi, but they didn't know the name of the company or its location. Some of them knew the location, but didn't know the company, and so on and so forth. So that was especially difficult, and I think that period and probably the next 1.5 years almost became a blur. So it's not for me. For most of the guys in the team were sort of walking zombies, right?
So one thing I just want to understand is these are people that worked really hard, put in a lot of work at the company.
Yeah.
You had your head of product. You had people who, you sat beside every single day at work.
Yeah.
And you as CEO of this business, you find out they're gone.
Yeah.
And how do you... These people love your business. They followed your vision as CEO and what you were trying to build.
Yeah.
How do you take that forward? How do you you're sitting in Zambia, you find out all this is happening. You obviously want to be back in Kenya. These are people's parents. These are people's, their family members, the cousins, the relatives, the aunties and the uncles of people.
Yeah.
How do you navigate that as a CEO? How do you go back to the office and sit there in Zambia and be like, all right, guys, we're going to figure this out? How do you do that?
Yeah. I think it's God's grace, right? I mean, I cannot point to at least any sort of conscious thought that I had at that time. So I got on the first plane out of Zambia. So we divided ourselves in a group. A bunch of us got on the first plane out of Zambia that night. So I got to Nairobi that morning, and then next to the office complex was the university, and a lot of the parents and so on had gathered there. I started going out to the parents, introducing myself, and so our staff, which was very special, had essentially sort of had this, everybody, there was a team assigned to each family. And so the different team leaders would sort of work, okay, this is the parents of so and so on. And so I just didn't know what to say. And so I shook their hand. I didn't know whether to say sorry. I just didn't know what to say.
So Ken, tell me about the time you flew back from Zambia after the attack, immediately on the next flight over to Nairobi. Tell me about that conversation with your wife about the attacks.
About the attacks. No, I think everyone was devastated, right? And of course, my wife had received a lot of calls, because when the attack was in the news in this complex, everybody wanted to find out. Everybody called anyone you knew who worked in that complex to find out whether they were okay. So my wife had sort of been fielding calls for a bit, but she knew, we'd been married for as long as the company has been alive. So my wife was very much always a part of the Cellulant story. So she knew a couple of the guys that we lost fairly well. So it was very devastating. I think I think you have a feeling of numbness, right? And disbelief, and the world feels like it's like things are moving, but they're moving in slow motion, and you almost walking like you're walking in a dream, and hoping that at some point you wake up and it's just a nightmare. So I got home, we changed, and then me and her sort of left. And we already had a couple of friends that had come home that morning. And so we went across to the university, there was the hostels, university hostels, where essentially people are gathering just next to the 14 Riverside, the office complex, and essentially everybody was sort of waiting for news about their loved ones and so on. So people who generally had been caught in the building. So this was essentially the first time that I was meeting face to face the parents of the guys we had lost. So it wasn't like from a sort of official police report, it hadn't been confirmed that they'd been lost. But a few of the parents, for some bizarre reason, actually had seen pictures of their kids. So our teams had organized themselves. So there was a group of staff assigned to each of the teams. So we walked around just saying hello to the parents, introducing ourselves. And frankly, I just didn't know what to say, right? I mean, I couldn't say that I'm sorry because that just didn't feel sufficient for the kind of pain we all were in, and most of all, they were in, right? I couldn't fathom it. So I just said hello, introduced myself, was introduced, and mostly said nothing. I just hung out there and just said nothing. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to tell them. But at some point, one of the moms of one of the young ones that was lost, and she still had another son that worked at Cellulant. Just told me, look, Ken, it's going to be fine. And for her, she said, for me, God gave me this guy for, I think, 21 years. I think he was about 21 years old. So who am I to question him, when he takes him away? In the manner he takes him away. So it's going to be okay. And I just could not understand, having gone through that situation, that somebody would have that calmness, that grace, and so on. And I think give us the strength that, look, we have to be calm and strong for each other. And we on that essentially where the strength was. So I think for me, it just inspired me to I can't say lead in that time, but to just be vulnerable, right? And always say, look, guys, how are you guys doing? Every time, sometimes the staff would because we were all sort of scattered, so we couldn't go back to the office again. So essentially, there was a team that was doing disaster recovery. They had already shipped from other countries. They'd organized themselves. There was no management memo, right? Like, people just figured out, okay, the team in Kenya is going to need support. It was a team of 40. They found an offsite and settled and provided support for customers. And so the team in Kenya essentially we hadn't organized ourselves around working, so everybody was everywhere. Once in a while, the teams would say, well, we haven't seen each other together. And so we'd gather together in a space in Westlands. And then we'd ask ourselves, how are you guys doing? And they'd ask me, how are you doing? And I'm saying, man, it's a fight every day. Sometimes I'm winning, sometimes I'm losing. And we kept doing that, and then eventually we got group therapy sessions and therapists into the mix.
Tell me, it seems like you've talked about your mother a lot and her being a very big influence for you.
Yeah.
Can you talk to me about that conversation you had about this with your mother right after the attacks?
Yeah, it's I think this was so devastating. I don't think most people knew what to say, right? And everybody would always, and my mom would always call and just say, like, how are you doing? Right? Are you going to be okay? My mom wasn't in the country at that time. She lived and worked in Switzerland for many years. Yeah, but always, how are you doing? and then sometimes I have strength, sometimes I wasn't doing okay at all. And I think she always reminded me is that, okay, but, also remember to take care of yourself.
Do you think you've healed from everything that happened there?
Frankly, I don't think that you heal really from that kind of experience. I don't think that you do. I think you learn to cope, and and basically you have a construct that allows you to not feel as much pain as one did in 2019, 2020. But you don't heal. Like every time I look at a policeman with an AK-47, like it transports me to that day. It doesn't pain as much, but for a couple of minutes, you zoom out and you see the faces of the guys, and you imagine and you replay that afternoon, and you play all kinds of scenarios. You wonder, would it have been different if we as leaders were in the building? Every time you will always find, something that sort of takes you back in that moment. So it doesn't hurt as much over time, but it never leaves you. Yeah.
How do you motivate a team right after a situation like that?
You take care of them without limit. Yeah. You just take care of the team without limit, without boundaries. If it's time they need, you give them time. If we needed to go out visit the parents, you go out and spend time with them. If they needed financial support, you push hard to make it happen. And that's it. I think that I always had the idea that actually building a business was sort of caring for you. You care for the people will care for the business, the people will care for the customers will care for the business.
Yeah.
And it's cliche, right? Like It's a thing that you read in business books sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think in this particular year, was maybe the year where we practiced that with no filter.
Yeah.
And with no competing interests, right? Like in none of our meetings we talk about P&L, our target, nothing. Not in 2019.
Wow.
Interestingly so, the business still grew.
Yeah.
In that year. And then I think the culture embedded itself, because actually the people that we lost, the brave six that we lost, essentially were lost pulling people out of the business, out of the building. And so even in that kind of situation, the values of the business filtered through. That you generally take care of your teams first, right? Like we always care for each other first before everything else, and sometimes put our interests behind us to take care of our teams and to take care of the business, and that's what happened. So we lost leaders that were trying to shield their teammates from danger, and that wouldn't leave their teams behind, because they would go back into the building and pull everybody out and go back and pull people out.
Let's talk about transitioning out of Cellulant. That was a very difficult decision for you to make. After 18 years, you've seen this baby from, beginning all the way to being a full 18-year-old business or baby. How was that? Well, how did you decide that you knew now was the right time? Earlier you talked about all the different sequence of events that happened leading up to this, but when did you know this is the right time?
Yeah. I mean, Ben, you're asking all the hard questions, right? At this pace, people might think that, building a business is so daunting, nobody should do it, right? I mean, there are lots of fun parts of the story, but the transition was difficult, right? It was difficult because I knew that I was always going to transition. I think as far back as 2016, I had already started to think and believe that actually that the business needed a different kind of leader at that stage. But actually nothing prepared me for the timing and essentially the sequence of events that sort of led to that, there's just final jumping off the line. I think Bolaji's departure took away something in my spirit, right? Like I never, it was one of those final moments I just said, look, I look at 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and now this, I just felt that, look, this mission and this business has taken so much from me. And in that moment, I didn't really feel good about the mission anymore. And the moment that happened, then it became very clear that, okay, then I probably just wasn't the right leader for the business for the next phase. I think the having that feeling, I took a break. I was so exhausted throughout that year. I hadn't taken leave for a couple of years actually. So I was close to burnout actually. When I think back in hindsight, I was actually
burnt out.
Yeah, I was basically running on empty, and I'd been for a while. And so I think it's my wife that just said, look, Ken, I think this is the end of the road, right? Like, I think, I don't think that staying on at Cellulant is now actually good for you. And not good for us as a family. Like, it's kids are teenagers and so on. Like, we have very little time with them before they go off to uni and so on. It's like, we want you back. Like, this business completely consumes you. And she made it clear that I generally didn't have a choice. in very colorful language, right? Like, like, this is the end of the road. Like, you just got to do this, otherwise we just won't survive. So I think when it was plainly put that way, it's like, I think it became clear actually she was absolutely right. It was always somewhere at the back of my mind. I sort of had all kinds of rationalization to deny the fact, but she was actually right. And so I had a conversation over that day or next day with a couple of guys. My chairman is a very good friend of mine as well. And a couple of close friends, and Faisal, who's co-founder, who's now responsible for tech. Across the group, there was sort of mixed reaction about this stuff. I think everybody needed to, it was a shock, everybody needed to digest it. And so the next day, I think I put together a sort of short note to the board, and I slept over it for one more day, and it felt right. It felt like the right thing to do, and essentially sort of kicked off the series of things that essentially led me to stepping away from day to day in May of 2021. So the note, I think I did that sometime towards the end of September 2020. Yeah.
So what are you spending your time now doing? Are you hanging out in Lamu? Are you coming to the real beaches in Zanzibar? Or where are you spending? What are you doing with most of your time now?
Yeah, so I think a lot of my time now is shaped by, again, a very simple hypothesis, out of my 20 years. So the way I look at my journey at Cellulant, I said, okay, we had a great mission. We did a lot of great things right. We learned the things that we did right. We did through a lot of trial and error.
Yeah.
We also made an incredible amount of expensive mistakes. Delayed decisions, wrong decisions, taking calls where we left money on the table, burnt cash, all kinds of things. We as founders also, sort of not all founders made it to the finish line.
Yeah.
And then when you think about the net sum of all of that, is that we built fairly decent company over a long period of time. I think if we think about the mission of the business was to build a business into $1 billion business, probably will be in maybe 2 to 3 years. That's my belief. So the journey took like 25 years maybe.
Yeah.
Sort of, end to end to mission.
Yeah.
I asked myself, now that I've had time to reflect on the journey, could we have made fewer mistakes? Absolutely. Is it possible that we could have done the same with less capital? Absolutely. With less wastage of capital and so on. Certainly. And I think then that could we as founders have made it alive? Absolutely. And so there were things obviously that I can see that we could have done different. But hindsight is 2020. And so my current mission, and it's a company called Pani. Pani is essentially short form from Mopani. Mopani is a hardy tree that grows only in Africa, in the Southern Africa region, in the sort of arid, semi-arid landscape. Very hardy, very resilient, and its leaves look like wings of butterflies, which represents growth and so on. So resilience and growth and so on. And so Pani is about then basically look, can we be that sort of? I think one entrepreneur called us an institutional co-founder. Like Pani is like this eclectic mix of people that essentially become an institutional co-founder.
Yeah.
So today we're a small team. It's myself, Koi, my wife, who's a professional coach. I'm a sort of street coach. I got my coaching things from the street. and Ken, who's an associate, who's is very good storyteller, very good with words, very good listener. And so what we try to do is just say, if you're going to walk this journey, you're going to make mistakes and so on. Can we be that partner that sort of walks so deeply embedded with the co-founding team, walk across that journey and just make sure they make fewer mistakes, don't repeat some of the same mistakes we made, probably be much more capital efficient and therefore end up with a little bit more equity with them.
Yeah.
And while we do that, and also become sort of a large investor in the cap table.
Nice.
By investing very early.
Yeah.
And also bringing African capital, right? We generally tend to think that because African capital understands the African context, then you need a good part of it in the mix, right? Which is not the case today.
Yeah.
And we think that then if we can do that sort of for the next 5 Cellulants, that it'll be a journey worth living, right? So just making sure that they arrive alive, they have a shoulder to lean on, a trusted sort of advisor. And then on the business side, we can actually sort of input their growth and so on and so forth and stuff like that. So that's what I do now. I sort of spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs, curating, trying to find these 5.
Yeah.
It's 5 because it's very hands-on, right?
Yeah.
So we dedicate a lot of time to each founder and so on. And that's it. And so in a sense, I spent the last 20 or so years dedicating 100%, 110% of my time building one business like Cellulant. So in this phase, myself and a small team split our time across, 5 to 10, sort of
companies,
businesses with the same aspiration, right? Same value, same aspiration.
So with all these things and people that you work with today,
Yeah.
you talk about the importance of having the right people at the organization. So the way I understand it is probably the people you're encouraging or advising the companies that you're helping. You're telling them the importance of hiring the right people at your organization.
Yeah.
What are your 2 most important tips that founders can learn from you about hiring?
I think after trying and structuring and doing all kinds of different things in recruitment, by far the best hires, I think by far the best hires who are essentially the guys running the business today are hired by gut, right? And you know, sometimes gut doesn't sound too structured or too disciplined, but actually a gut is an instinct for, I mean, you as a founder, you've got a mental map of where you want to go and a good appreciation of what it will take, because generally you've probably served in most parts of the business. So if it's technology, I've written code, so you have a sense of what that's going to look like. If it's commercial, you've been selling to customers, you have a sense what's that going to look like. So this thing called gut actually is a very clear mental map of actually what you need. And sometimes and it's so crisp, you can't condense it into an HR process and so on. So you use the HR process to sift and so on, but in the final thing, you have to look at people in the eye. You have to have a conversation, interrogate, and take a call on whether they're going to be fit for mission or not, right? So I think, like, always trust that, right? Like, don't ever trade that for a process. Mm-hmm. That I think by far is probably one of my greatest learnings. The second one is that, you know, very early on when people come in, you know, like, okay, so you do the gut thing. By the way, you will always get it wrong at some point. Actually, maybe 50% of the times you get it wrong. Mm-hmm. What I've seen is that without a doubt, by week 2, week 3, you already know that it was a wrong hire. You know, I mean, so it's like when I look at the right hires and I look at the wrong hires, like by week 3, you already know. The difference between that knowing and when you actually correct it determines how much school fees you pay for that wrong hire.
Wow.
And in there is always a process of sort of a false sense of trying to be a good human being, a false sense of trying to be fair, and then you have this rationalization of saying, okay, I need to give them more time, I do this and so on. And you know, even in my most decisive times, it took 6 to 9 months. Oh. Incredibly expensive. And so my theory is that by week 3, if you know, I always say that it's actually always it's actually fair to the person. That because once you know, you begin to doubt. And the moment you begin to doubt, you begin to hold back trust. And it is absolutely unfair, human to human, to sort of to be in a setup where you're withholding trust. You start to do that. Mm-hmm. And actually it's not fair on the person. And I think so. So founders actually, by week 3, when you start to have a doubt, I always say, don't walk the journey of doubt alone. That's a point to start having a conversation of, hey man, or hey lady, I'm worried about, there's this stuff that I'm worried about. This is what I'm feeling about it. And even if sometimes you can't articulate it, you know, get them into the conversation, right? Because there's only good things that can come out of that, right? I always say that the journey for success should be co-owned, right? It's not okay, so I'm the boss, I'm making judgment whether you're doing a good job or not. It's like both of you have it's a partnership to succeed, right? For the business, for the mission, but also as colleagues, right? I like to enjoy working together, to have mutual trust in some of the responsibilities we are taking. So I think trust your gut when recruiting. 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, trust what you see. And
if it's a no, then it's a no.
And if it's a no, begin that engagement then. Don't walk the journey alone. Just get together and just say, wow, geez, I watched you the last 3 weeks. I am worried whether you're going to make it. I think this is fine. This is not okay. This is fatal. Am I fair? Am I seeing the right thing? Is that how you see it? Let's discuss it, and so on and so forth, and take that to its logical conclusion and correct it, and then have no fear about starting again.
So Ken, you grew Cellulant from 1 country to over 18 countries across Africa out of the 54 here, raised over $50-60 million in funding, and grew a team that create so much value for multiple businesses, including our own, like Nala. There are so many wins along this journey, even though you've had many difficult moments, especially the last several years as a CEO. What has been one of your proudest moments as you take a look and step back?
I think that's an easy one to answer. I think so. First, you're being too generous on me, all right? Like I think building is a team sport. It's really so. There's basically all of us of the team and the team that's there, and a lot of other early people that were Cellulant then went out to start their own businesses. So building was actually always a collective effort, and I think that was the beauty of the Cellulant. That's what makes me very proud. Just the people that are there, the people that left and went into the working world and so on. It's like Cellulant people are really special people.
Nice.
Right? In their approach to work, and the values and so on and so forth. And that every once in a while I get a text of how influential we were in people's careers, and that makes me super proud of what we did. Yeah.
What matters to you most in life and why?
Today's relationships. I think that's probably the most valuable asset I built over time, right? I think the good thing about having these kinds of sort of interesting mission and tough times and so on, you really come to appreciate the power of relationships. So in the hard times, relationships were patient and they invested and they pushed you across very difficult moments. And in the happy times, they were also happy for you and so on. So I value a lot of relationships, and I think in this journey I'm sort of being very conscious and purposeful in nurturing them.
Cool. Quick fire round. You watch sports?
Do I watch sports?
Yes.
Occasionally.
Which sport?
Occasionally football.
Okay, all right.
Occasionally basketball.
All right. Important questions here. Ronaldo or Messi?
Yeah?
Ronaldo or Messi?
No clue.
No clue.
No allegiance. I don't know what the fuss is about the two of them.
All right, we'll keep it simple.
I think the footballer I kind of liked was, is it Ronaldinho? The guy with
Ronaldinho,
yeah. I watched a lot of, I liked his vibe. I watched a lot of his stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, important question. Githeri or Pilau?
Pilau.
All right.
Feels exotic.
Yeah, feels exotic.
Yeah.
Lamu or Zanzibar? Don't let me down.
That was a hard one because I've had great experiences in both. Zanzibar feels exotic. Yeah.
Cool. Ken, it's such a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for all the work that you've done to the ecosystem and helping build the continent. Really happy that you're here today, and keep going and keep pushing. I'll be cheering you on as much as I can.
Thank you, Benjamin, and good to meet you. I've followed your journey as well. So, yeah. Cheers. Thanks.
Cheers.